I would say that we don't know that beforehand, because if we look back in history, we see that we never knew which technologies that would be successful. You can't know that beforehand, because it's not really about the technology and the qualities of the technology in itself. There's so much more that has to happen in order for a technology to become successful. There are so many actors involved in the diffusion of an innovation. And so this is really unpredictable. But what we need to see is that some technologies are definitely more appropriate than others. Some technologies are not very good, and we should just let go of them. But before we know that, a good thing is to make sure that you develop a number of technologies in parallel. So instead of just focusing on only solar or only wind or only hydro, you should develop a big diversity of renewable energy technologies, which is in this case what we want to have, because we see that that is necessary for a sustainable energy system. Because if you create a diversity of technologies, you create like a response capacity. And response capacity is good, because when you reach a certain stage and you see that now we have an opportunity for a scale-up or a take-off, then you are ready to respond to the opportunity. So what you create is basically a diversity and the variability. You create the human capital, and you build up the institutional frameworks, you build up the industry to supply the energy, and you build the networks. And then, when you have the opportunity, that's where the technology that is the most appropriate for meeting the demands of the end users can take off. So, as far as I'm considered, I think that policymakers, they can know beforehand, but they can stimulate development if they focus on like how can we create diversity, how can we enhance experimentation, how can we enhance market formation, how can we mobilize resources. So they should take like a process, they should look at the processes that need to be put in place for a new technology to grow forward, and work with all the actors and create the networks. And then you adapt the institutions according to the specific need of each technology, because each technology requires different policies. From the user perspective, from the local people's perspective, it doesn't matter the source of supply. What is important is what can be done with electricity. And depending on the energy source, they have different output, like a different power capacity, for example. And that means that depending on what you want to do with electricity, like the activity you want to do, let's say you want to have energy for agricultural purposes, then for some of the agricultural purposes it's enough with solar PV, because it is perfect, because it's decentralized, you can place your irrigation pumps where you need them, you can develop the irrigation systems. But for having electrified mills for your corn, for example, you need a stronger power source than only a household system. So maybe a pico hydro could provide that, or you need like a biogasifier that turns gas into electricity, for example, or you need actually then mechanical power. So depending on the activity you want to do, if it's something that requires heavy labor, you should think about what could provide the heavy labor. Is it intensive, or is it something that an activity that needs not such an high energy, high power at the one time, but you need something that is there all the time, continuously. Is it a service? For example, refrigeration. You need a constant supply to keep maybe your equipment in the hospital, the vaccines cold, for example. So depending on the type of activity and the possible solutions that are there, you can design your system and think about what is appropriate in this specific case. And in many cases, in now, like in poor areas of Mozambique, Tanzania, where I've been working, Pico Hydro, if that's available, it's a very small power output, but it's actually enough because demand isn't that big. But if you connect that or combine it with solar, for example, you could get something that is more stable over the year, also during the dry season. So they have different qualities, the different energy sources. So we need to think more about what is functional from a user perspective, what is working for what we want it to do, you know, and then you work your way backwards, and then you let the engineers come up with a brilliant design. I think it's the same thing here. There is not like one business model, it's a diversity of business models, because if we have a diversity, we have the response capacity. And there are so many different things that works. The thing is that we also have so many examples where it doesn't work. And normally it's because the business model didn't take the local context into account properly. And normally it's because it was technology driven perhaps, or it was just coming from the entrepreneur, and they didn't have an understanding of the local situation and the demand side of providing electricity. And I think that we need to see that business models are not only about supplying energy, it's also about then the customer who will be the productive user of electricity. Because that customer needs to be a successful entrepreneur, otherwise he or she will lose access to electricity, and that is bad for the person supplying electricity. So you have actually very strong interdependence between the energy supplier and the entrepreneur using the electricity or fuel, or you know. So you need to see those as depending on each other. The entrepreneur using electricity needs stable, reliable supply that is not too expensive in order to be, you know, productive and be able to plan business, and not otherwise you can create a lot of vulnerability in the system. Because if you have access to electricity and then you build your business on that, and all of a sudden supply is gone and you have a blackout and you don't have any backup, it could actually destroy the company or the business for this person, because they cannot deliver what they promise to customers, or their equipment is damaged. They have to pay very expensively for backup, etc. So you need actually to think about business models that provide a certain robustness for both the electricity supply and for the users. And they have different needs, I would say. So it depends on what type of business you have. So it needs to be carefully thought about. But if you want like a blueprint, let's say you want a general model that you can replicate, I think you can still have like some general models, but the important thing then is that they are flexible, so that you can adapt them to the local circumstances. So I think we should think more like how can we reduce vulnerability, how can we create flexibility, how can we enhance people's abilities to be productive and use electricity productive. So that's what the business models need to do for us. Of course, an entrepreneur that sells the electricity needs the end users to be happy, because if you have unsatisfied end users, they decide to stop paying for the service. And then it's not a sustainable business. So you actually need a communication between the supplier and the end user. And they might have different needs, you know. But in any case, we need people to generate benefits and incomes at every level, like at every stage. So all the people involved it should be a win-win. Then it's a good business model. So let's say you provide services that either generates income for people or reduce their expenses and improve their well-being. Then you have happy customers. So this is a bit simplistic, but I'm just trying to like map out the way I approach it, because it's I don't pretend to know how to be an entrepreneur because I don't know that. If we look at the potential for energy markets right now, seeing what's already there in the rural areas of countries like Tanzania and Mozambique, there's not that much industry, so I don't think we should hope that there will be like a big enterprise or industry that will develop. I think rather we need to focus at the small scale, the micro scale of the household, the small scale of the village, and the medium scale enterprises that could create a bit more employment. And one way to create an inclusive market is if we, for example, if you decide to work with electrifying a processing activity that involves farmers, you will have so many end users that benefit. So let's say if I move into processing of milk products, and I can electrify that, I can increase the productivity of that, that will have positive benefits for the suppliers of the raw material, namely the farmers that supplies the milk. And you will also have positive benefits for the consumers. And what you do then is the same as grinding mills, is that you reach a lot of people and a lot of households. So many people benefit, even if you maybe you focus on developing just a factory, but it has some very good effects because there are networks out in society. And I think that's important to focus on those activities that have very good effects for a big number of people. For me, this is a combination of seeing what is there and understanding what is the reality at the local level for people in the villages. And for them to become productive users of electricity, we need to focus on markets, because electricity is only a means for doing other things. So we need to focus on the market development within the productive uses, such as agriculture and manufacturing, etc. And what we do then is that we work around what is already there, and we try to have policies that target the barriers that needs to be removed for these people to get a better access to markets. And markets, I mean, then you rely on much more than electricity. You need transportation, you need communication, you need information about prices and of your products. You need perhaps to diversify your products so that you don't sell the same thing as everyone else. So you need to really look at how you can strengthen rural markets, and maybe let the rural markets develop around small centers that are already there, so that these can then you can provide the roads, etc. You can provide the communication and transportation infrastructure, because you focus on small centers that can grow. And from the national perspective, the policies are supposed to respond to local needs. But policies can be very proactive as well, especially if we think about policies that aim to create the processes that needs to happen, that to build the networks, to make it easier to be an entrepreneur in an area. But for example, it's often mentioned the success of the German feed-in tariffs. One reason why that was such a big success was that before it was introduced at the national level, for many years there had been ongoing local solar initiatives. There were small end-user associations spread out all over the country, and they basically developed and innovated around the products. They tried new designs, they made it more efficient, but they also collaborated with local governments and tried various policy instruments, for example, feed-in tariffs at the local scale. And they had actually tested some of the solutions before. So when the government decided to go for solar PV development and to do the feed-in tariff, there had been some experiments before, and there was a local base of actors. And that then boosted this activity even more and made the market formation possible, that it could take off and increase. But you can't get the same positive effect if there's no local base. if you have a policy that's very top down without somebody at the local base who can respond to it, you're not going to get the same type of positive effects. So this is also about creating the response capacity of local actors so that they can react in a good way to good policies. So I see that as, a very important dynamic between the national and the local level. And you need to involve the actors that are in between, the local governments, there's so many actors in society who needs to take part in this. So this will cross sectors, it will cross disciplines, it will involve civil society, academia, private sector, and government. So there's really this is really about collaboration and mutual learning. So I think that is what policies need to do. They need to increase learning and share learning between us. And it has been, we know how to do this basically because we have examples. And we can look at those and learn from them what they did and how they did things right. But also we need to understand that it will take time. So normally you will have a trial and failure, try and fail period of maybe a decade before you start seeing the positive effects. So you need to be patient at the same time as you need to be impatient and get things going. So I think policy has an extremely important role, but it can only respond if there are actors who drive the process.